Well, about 6 years later, the man shows zero remorse. And today was Dr. Anthony Fauci walking into the Senate doing exactly what you might expect. But before he did, before he even answered a single question, President Trump already delivered his verdict on Truth Social. Trump said that Fauci had made too many bad calls, especially on masks. He overrode Fauci on shutting down the country, called Fauci's ideas crazy, repeated his belief that the virus came from Wuhan. And Trump also accused Fauci of protecting China and said that Biden later gave him vast destructive power and a pardon. Now, timing on this is important. Trump was saying all of this before Fauci sat down, before the cameras turned into the witness table, and before the Fifth Amendment became the answer that Fauci gave to pretty much every question. When Fauci walked into the Senate and did the thing that would tell any of us why so many Americans are still angry, the questions arose, but the answers disappeared. Now, Senator Bernie Moreno asked a question that I think people have been carrying since 2020. Not a complicated legal question. It was a basic question about the decisions that shaped the most disruptive period of our lives.
Here I am sitting in front of you 6 years later saying, who the fuck do you think you were for doing that?
Now, that question should have opened the door. Instead, it opened the wound and it brought it back because the public didn't see accountability today. We saw a protected official sitting behind the Fifth Amendment while ordinary Americans are still living with the consequences of the policies that he defended. Then came the first unmistakable signal of what this Fauci hearing was going to be.
What week is it today?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color tie are you wearing?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color is the carpet in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment.
Now, that is the image Americans are going to remember. A guy who once stood at the center of the national response, refusing to answer basic questions. And that's where the anger comes from. People were willing to listen. We were willing to sacrifice, shut down of businesses, miss funerals, watching our children lose time, not being able to be with our friends and family while many of them lost their lives. Some of us accepted restrictions because we were told that the sacrifice was necessary. Now, what we're not willing to accept is the second half of the bargain. Okay, the public was told that extraordinary rules were necessary for public safety. Families paid the price, businesses paid the price, workers paid the price, patients paid the price. But when the question finally reached the people with authority, the consequences stopped at the ordinary citizen. Some Americans want to know how many deaths may have been connected to this decision that Fauci peddled. They want to understand the impact of these lockdowns, the mandates, the vaccines. They want to know what was known, what was ignored, and what was sold to the public as settled when it wasn't. And some of us paid a personal price. I personally lost my father after he developed a heart condition following his booster shot. And that is my experience. I'm not presenting it as a medical ruling. I'm telling you that this is why this is an abstract argument for families like mine. But then you have to add in the double standard. The Justice Department, in its record, describes Fauci's pardon as full and unconditional for offenses related to his federal service beginning in 2014 through January 19th of 2025. That pardon, well, it doesn't erase the questions. It makes the refusal to answer them just that much more infuriating.
You don't have any rights under the Fifth Amendment because you've been pardoned, as you very well know. As the Supreme Court has been clear for a century and more, Brown versus Walker, 1896, when he has been pardoned, he may not stand upon his privilege. You know that. Your lawyers sitting behind you now shifting nervously in their chairs. They know it. This isn't about the Constitution. This isn't about the law. This is about contempt. Contempt for this body and contempt for the American people. But I think I know why you're doing it. It's because you don't want to answer questions. It's because you did all kinds of terrible things. It's because during the pandemic, you got rich, didn't you? You got rich while people were dying, hundreds of thousands of Americans, over 1 million in the end, and you were getting rich. And not only were you doing that, you were using federal employees with taxpayer money to apply for and solicit cash prizes for you personally. Cash prizes totaling over $1 million. You did all of that during the pandemic, didn't you? That's a question.
Yeah. So look, regular Americans don't expect a pardon to arrive before the questions do. Okay, we don't expect the system to tell them to obey every order, absorb every consequence, and then watch the people who issued the orders walk away behind a shield. That is the multi-tiered justice that people are talking about. The rules come down, the damage moves outward, the accountability moves upwards, and then disappears. Now, you can blame Joe Biden for granting the pardon. Fine. But where was Josh Hawley then? Where was Congress? Where were they before the pardon was granted? I mean, Rand Paul was criticizing Fauci early. Josh Hawley's confronting him now, but the public is still looking at the same result. Years of anger, years of questions, and no one willing to own the consequences. Nobody being accountable. That is why the receipts matter. Not because Americans need another lecture about the past. We need to know whether the statements made during the pandemic can survive contact with the record.
I hope to hear testimony from Anthony Fauci today. We haven't, but I think it's important that we do hear from him. So we will have a video we'll play in a moment. For years, Anthony Fauci has been the public face of saying this in all likelihood came from nature. He kept saying, it's the marketplace, it's the marketplace, it's the marketplace. He's been saying that on television up until recently. But what we find is that what he was saying in public is different than what he was saying in private. In January, in private, he wrote that looks like the wet market was a super spreader event. It didn't originate there. We know that some of the earliest deaths and sickness came from somewhere else. But then for years and years, we got dishonesty.
Look, if the decisions that were made were right, they should be defended. If the warnings were accurate, they should be proven. If mistakes were made, then they should be admitted. But don't ask the public to forget what happened while the person most associated with those decisions refuses to answer the most basic question about them. Okay? Now, folks, if you like what you're seeing, please like the video, share this video, and subscribe before we get into the next update. As I said, the public does not need another performance of outrage. Okay, we don't need it. Not from the Senate, not from anybody in Congress. We need answers. We need names. And it needs a standard of justice that doesn't change when the person being questioned used to be in power. Some families are still carrying the loss. Some people are still dealing with the consequences of decisions that they were told they had no choice but to accept. And now, when Congress finally puts Fauci in the chair, the answer to the basic question is the Fifth Amendment. Well, that's not closure. Not at all. That's the precipice of the anger. And unfortunately, I don't know if contempt is even worth it. I mean, what is that going to bring? What's the charges? What's the penalty? Will that make anybody happy? Or will that just reopen the wound even further? I don't know what to say about this one. This one hits home for me. But let me know in the comments. How were you impacted by this evil man? Because I know every one of you has a story.
Is that JR? Yes. But we love you, JR. Thank you very much. Thank you, man. This guy, he's a genius. Thank you, JR. Really nice.